Luke, where we read, "Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in a group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, 'Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety.' And Jesus said to them, 'Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?' But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years, in divine and human favor." Let us pray. O Lord, may your words only be spoken, and your words only heard. And we ask this all for your love's precious sake. Amen. Please be seated. Kids Chapel, lovely Miss Ann, the handsome Mr. Lathrop, and who's number 3? The lovely Miss Miriam. Oh man, that's a killer team today. Holy cow. Man, makes you wish you were young again. Well, this is just an aside. This is not the sermon. This is just an aside. This just crossed my mind when I was reading the gospel. And it's just to say that in the story of the Holy Family this morning, I hope you got that they left Jesus behind. This is like Home Alone, except it really happened. And it takes them 4 days to find him. So I don't know what the worst thing you've ever done as a parent is, but it's probably not that bad. And Jesus turned out all right. Okay? Jesus turned out all right. So for all of you who are maybe anxious about your parenting, worried about this, feeling like maybe you're really messing up your kids, don't worry about it. It's going to be okay, all right? If the Holy Family can do that, and Jesus turned out all right, you should be okay too. All right, well, when we actually come to the sermon, that was just free. Here's actually the sermon. Have you ever noticed, those of you who go to the gym, have you ever noticed how many people at the gym are unhappy? I used to think it was just that when people would find out I was a priest, that everyone wanted to talk to me about their problems. But I've always been surprised at how many of the people at the gym just want to talk about some real struggles they're having in life. Have you ever noticed how many people at the office are unhappy? Have you ever noticed, and we need to be a little careful about this one, but have you ever noticed how many people at home are unhappy? Now, there's a real simple reason for this. It's a very straightforward reason. And once we understand the reason, we can begin to see an equally simple and straightforward thing that we can do about that. So let me just help you understand why that may be the case. And to do that, we're going to engage in a very simple task together. And what I want you to do is I want you to think of words that meet a certain qualification, okay? So I'm going to have you think of words. We're going to take 15 seconds to think of all the words that meet this qualification. And I just want you, as you think of those words, I want you to count them off on your fingers, okay? So don't say them out loud, just think to yourself. So what I want you to do is I want you to think of all the words that you can think of that describe something that's white, all right? So just like snow, white, milk, white. I'm sort of priming you here, priming the pump, helping you out. I just want you to think for 15 seconds, just like snow, white, milk, white. I want you to think of all the words that are white. All right? So ready, set, go. Snow, milk, white. All right, 15 seconds are up. Was that easy? How many people found that to be harder than you thought it was going to be? How many people had a hard time coming up with white things? All right, how many of you got 5? How many got 5 or less? Let's just, show of hands, 5 or less. Okay, see, most of us 5 or less. How many of you got less than 10? Anybody get more than 10? Maybe 1 or 2. Very, very few of you got less than 10. And yet there's so many white things all around us. Why is that the case? Well, psychologists call this inhibition. And what happens is we make such a strong association with white between snow and white and milk and white. When we think of white, we think of snow. When we think of white, we think of milk. We make such a strong connection with these words as defining what white is that our brain simply can't connect with anything else that's white. All the other things that are white, our cognitive processes are inhibited. And so when I primed you with these two words, I actually shut you down. If I hadn't given you these two words, all kinds of white words would have just popped right into your head. But by forming these two connections, they inhibited everything else. They shut down your larger cognitive processing, your ability to process like that. Now, inhibition does not occur only with words. It's actually how our brains function. It also occurs with goals. And psychologists call this, appropriately enough, goal inhibition. So if you set a goal about something that really, really matters to you, and you focus sort of single-mindedly on that goal, it's going to inhibit your ability to care about much of anything else. There's another name for this, also called tunneling. And tunneling is exactly what it sounds like. It's like when we're so single-minded in our pursuit of a goal, it brings us into a tunnel. And all we're aware of, our visual field, is reduced to the tunnel. Everything outside the tunnel, out of sight, out of mind. It's actually a process of neglect. And what we neglect decays. You know that, right? What we neglect decays. It doesn't stay the same. It doesn't maintain. It decays. That's the way things work. So, when we have the person who makes a goal out of having bigger biceps, and they're single-minded in pursuing that goal, the likelihood is they're going to have bigger biceps, and they'll look in the mirrors and say, oh man, I look pretty good, and chances are they do. But if in pursuit of pursuing those bigger biceps, their ability to think about their relationships is inhibited, and therefore they neglect their relationships, you'll find a lot of relationally impoverished people at a gym, at least in my experience. If you go into the office, and a person's goal is to succeed, to be the youngest CEO ever, to crack the ceiling at age 40, and they just pursue that with a great single-mindedness, they well might do that. But being so single-minded about that goal, being, tunneling in the pursuit of that goal, they're going to forget about everything else, and so maybe by 50, they're going to be so out of shape, they have their first heart attack, and that changes everything. And they just stop sleeping. They slip into a deep funk. I mean, that's the night, the worm turns. And a person in their family, if they're just so focused on their family, it's how we get helicopter parents, for instance. They're so focused on their family. Now, again, we need to be careful here. Family is a good thing. Family needs to be a priority, but not to the exclusion of everything else. Family, just like other things, needs to be put in its proper place. So they're so focused on their family that they neglect the sources of support that are going to help them through the tough times that inevitably come to a family. Then that's just going to start a downward spiral because they're not going to have that support. They're going to put more pressure on their kids or on their spouse to give them what they need, which their spouse or the kid can't give them, until they get more, and it just starts this downward spiral. It just goes down and down and down and down. Entirely predictable. Now, at the same time, not everybody at the gym is unhappy. Not everybody in the office is unhappy. Not everybody at home is unhappy. There are some people at the gym who are the happiest people you ever wanted to meet. There's some people in the office who are the happiest people you ever want to meet. There's some people in their families who are the happiest people you ever want to meet. What's the difference between them? Well, I'd suggest that the difference between them is these folks have figured out how to balance out all the areas of life that are necessary for a life well lived. They don't get stuck in the tunnel. They figured out a way to overcome goal inhibition, so they're not just focused on one thing. So you look at these people's lives. They're fit because fitness is really, really important. They are, they're happy in their families, and they have lots of friends, and so, there's a profound sense of relational well-being in their lives. They're doing good work that matters. At the end of the day, they know they're doing something important. They're making achievements that really do make the world a better place to be. And that kind of achievement is so important. Don't let anybody tell you different. And then sort of underneath it all, they have the ability to manage their interior life wisely, to manage their emotional life wisely. And by the way, that's what we're going to talk about next week. We're going to give you some very practical tips on how to do that next week. So do not miss next week. Do not miss next week. They have all these areas, working for them, and their spiritual life is working for them. And I don't just mean some vague, abstract belief about some good God out there who's such a nice guy that everything's going to work out in the end. That's not really spirituality. That's just an excuse to be self-centered. And to live life the way we want to live it. No, I'm talking about people who are part of an active part of a faith community and who are vibrantly living out that faith in their everyday lives. And you've all met people like this. I met a person like this when I visited Tim Dilliston at work a few weeks ago. And he just happened to have a Z06 Corvette, which I understand now has gone to Texas, which has me very, very sad. Has it actually sold? The Z06 Corvette has 505 horsepower. And they needed somebody to put a few extra miles on it. So Tim very graciously called me and said, hey, can you come down to the office and we'll take this out for a spin? And I said, oh, let me see, Tim. It's a very busy day. Yes! And so how soon can I come? So we went down and we did take the car out. And I don't think I was even out of the parking lot before Tim had his hands on the dashboard and said, well, take it a little bit easy, Rob. And I said, okay. But while I was there, I met one of Tim's associates. And he was just the nicest guy. He was one of those guys who just from the inside out glowed. He's probably, I'm going to guess he was maybe in his early 60s. But he was slim and trim and he was fit. He had a ready smile. I mean, he just had this glow about him. He was friendly. You could tell he related to people easily. You could tell that he just liked people. You could tell that in his job he was really helping people and he felt good about that. And so when I had a moment with him while Tim was doing some other things that he had to tend to, I just said to him, I got to know. Just tell me, are you a person of faith? And this big smile comes across his face and he says, I go to Mass every day. So I just can't imagine my life without God in it. I mean, that just sets my day off in the right way and just gets me going in the right direction. And I thought, this is it. This is a guy who has all those areas of his life working, and that's why he has such a sense of well-being. That's why he's flourishing. That's why he is so cotton-picking happy. And the simple truth of the matter is, if you neglect any one of those areas, there is going to be hell to pay. You might be able to get by for a few years, a few decades. You might be able to go to the gym, and remember, I was a bodybuilder for a few years, so I'm talking a little bit about me, and go and look at your biceps and say, oh, wow, I'm pretty good. That satisfies for a little while. But you move into your 40s, your 50s, not so much. You might be tremendously successful in the office. You might be the youngest CEO they ever had. Everybody looks at you and marvels, and you bask in the adulation, and you make tons of money. But you head into your 40s or your 50s, and you look at yourself in the mirror, and you think, oh, man. And you look at the devastation. You're on your second or third marriage. Your kids are alienated. And you just think, holy cow, how did I miss the boat? And so, you neglect any one of these areas, man. Sooner or later, there's going to be hell to pay. And the interesting thing is that the crises in people's lives are actually becoming more frequent and younger. So now they talk about quarter-life crises. It's no longer just midlife crises, no longer just a crisis when you retire, but now they talk about quarter-life crises because people are experiencing this even in their 20s because we don't know how to live in this world that we live in. And so few people get life right. And so they just move sort of from crises to crises to crises, which creates tunnels, which exacerbates the problem. And it's the way so many people live. There's a better way. And that better way is again, to tend to all these areas. And so for the month of January, we're going to be engaged in a sermon series that we're calling Stronger. And we're asking the question, what if in 2014 we grew stronger in all the areas of our life that matter most? Not just one. That's actually a recipe for disaster. But if we grew stronger in all the areas of our life that matter most. And our hope is that we will. That in the areas of our life that matter the most, we will grow stronger in 2014. So I hope you will not miss a Sunday in January because it's going to be important. And then Ann's got a sermon series planned for February that I happen to know a little bit about that's really, really exciting too, so you don't want to miss that either. You just can't wait. Now, the first category that we're going to talk about today, and we're going to talk about sort of briefly because I've used most of my time on what was the intro, but the good news in this sermon, the intro is this much of it, and the sermon itself is about this much of it, so we're almost there, so relax. And you can just sort of pay attention to the rest of it. We're going to look at the worship piece of it. We're going to look at the spiritual piece of it. We're going to look at getting our spiritual life right. And it's here that Jesus is so instructive to us. Because as we saw in today's gospel, from the earliest time, Jesus made just the highest of priorities of being in his Father's house. His Father's house was the place of public worship. And in his day it was the temple. For us it would be the church. Now people say, I can worship on the trout stream, I can worship on the golf course. Sure you can. But chances are you don't. I know that about you because I know that about me. If I'm on the trout stream, I'm not worshiping. I'm figuring out how to catch a cotton-picking trout. That's why it's so important. If you really want to get fit, you go to a gym. Or you go to a place where other people care about being fit. And all the statistics show the people who do the best are the people who do that. Some people with exceptional discipline and willpower, which most of us don't have, can make it work at home. But those people are few and far between. So Jesus knew, he made a priority from the time he was a kid to being in his Father's house week in and week out. And Luke 4:16 tells us that by the time he got older, every week he was in church. He was at the temple. That was his custom. That defined his life. That defined who he was. And frankly, if you call yourself a Christian as I call myself a Christian, then that's what it means to follow Jesus. If that was his custom, then we can do no less. If that was good enough for Jesus, then that needs to be good enough for us too. And if you're not a Christian, if you're trying to figure this whole thing out, then even people who don't necessarily believe Jesus was God believe that Jesus set the standard for a life well lived. So it might be worth emulating Jesus in this, just for the month of January. See how it works for you. See if it introduces something into your life that was missing, that helps you build a life in which you're flourishing, and when you have this profound sense of well-being where you just glow. And so this is what Jesus does. And those of us who follow Jesus, then what we need to do is we need to rearrange our schedules. We need to arrange our priorities. We need to, so that week in and week out, we're in church. All right? Now, there's 3 reasons why this is important. I'm going to go through them very quickly. But here's the first reason. Being in church will challenge you. It's the reason that your faith will grow stronger, that your spiritual life will grow stronger, because being in church challenges us. Because when we gather with the people of God, when we bring that kind of intentionality, when we bring that kind of discipline, we bring that kind of focus, it primes us. That's another dynamic, another cognitive dynamic. It primes us to hear the voice of God speaking to us. And so this becomes a place, because of the focus, the intentionality, the discipline, where our hearts are open, maybe through a sermon, maybe through a scripture reading, maybe through a song. I mean, wasn't the worship today, didn't it just bless you? Holy cow, it sure blessed me. And so we just feel God encouraging us, inspiring us, speaking to us, challenging us. You need to be challenged. I need to be challenged. When we're in the tunnel, we need somebody to say to us, you are in the tunnel, get out. It's too high a price to pay. I know it looks good to you now, but there's going to be hell to pay later on. Yeah, your job feels like it's going great, and it is, and that's a beautiful thing, and we celebrate with you. But if that's all you're doing, believe me, there's going to come a day where you say, oh man, I blew it, So you need to be challenged. Sometimes we get off course. Sometimes we're not true to our values. Sometimes we're not true to our best selves. And so about every 7 days, we just need somebody to say to us, remember what's important. Remember what matters. Remember what you value. Remember what it looks like for you to be your truest and best self. So you get off course. We've talked about this before. You get off course, and everybody does. Happens to every single one of us. Just a little bit easy to get back on course about every 7 days. If every 7 days somebody says, what matters? You say, ooh, I got a little off course. You bring it back around. Simple. But a week goes by, or a little further off course. A month goes by, or even further off course. A year goes by, a decade goes by, and now you're so far off course, you may never get back. And that's how people have their quarter life crisis, their midlife crisis, their retirement crisis, all the crises that so dominate our lives today. And so we need to be challenged. When we allow God to challenge, we allow God to speak to us. When we come to this place with dedication, discipline, intentionality, allow God to speak to us, we hear His voice. Then what happens is we are transformed. And I'll just tell you, I am so thankful for the way God has transformed me. I've told you before, and this is entirely true, I would not even want to know me if God was not at work in my life. And this, I'm not saying I'm great. I'm not saying anything. I'm saying something about God. When I meet people at the gym who are having the problems that they're having, when I meet people in the community that are having the problem they're having, I so often think, that could have been me. That would have been me. That so easily could have been me. And again, I'm not saying anything great about me. I'm not saying there's anything special about me. I'm just saying I am so grateful to God and His influence in my life and the way that it's transformed me and helped me become the person that I am. I mean, I sometimes look at, some of our kids, they get involved in relationships, and let's say they get involved in a relationship with a kid who has a temper problem. And it just makes everything miserable. and I think, I so wish that they were at a church, a good church, not all churches, a good church, where somebody would speak into their life and would address that problem in that kid's life and help them to move beyond it, because that would so transform that person and their relationship. How do I know? Because that's the story of my life. And that can be the story of your life too. And then the final part is, when we come together, it's fun. We have such a good time together. Worship isn't grim. It's not skullduggery. It's not, the world tells you joy is so many places where joy will never be found. But right here, when you can say, it's good to be me. And it's not easy to say that, is it? Not easy for me to say that. There's a lot of days where it feels pretty bad to be me. But we can say, it's good to be me. It's good to be here. It's good to be here right now. And a part of this thing that God is doing. Wow. Let me close with one final story, very quick story, and we're done. This one comes from a course that was taught at Harvard. It was called the number one course that they taught at Harvard. And it was a course just on happiness. And they put it in a 34-page book, and I recommend it to you. It's a quick and easy read. Everybody should read it. And so they offer this course on happiness, and they figure nobody's going to take it. Because they figure Harvard, the highest IQs in the world, the greatest overachievers in the world, they're going to want to study hard science. Man, hard science is where it's at. They're going to want to study business and economics because they want to rise to the top of their careers and make buckets of money. So they offer this course on happiness. And they find that the students just pour into it in droves. More people than they ever would have expected. And they find out why. Because they're all miserable. And when they do this study, they find out that 80% of them report being so depressed at some point in their life at Harvard that they're not even able to work. That the thing that makes them most successful in this world is so badly impaired that they can't even continue to do it. And so when somebody says, here's a course on happiness, it's just like a lifeline to them. And they latch onto it and they say, oh, please. And they all show up for this course. And it begins to change their lives. Well, at the end of the quarter, they asked the professor, one of the students asked the professor, and he says, this sounds like all the stuff I've always heard in church. Isn't this what they teach you, at church? Isn't this what people teach people in their faith? And he says, well, yeah, actually it really is. He says, my background actually is in theology. So friends, you want to know how to thrive. You want to know how to live life well. Be here every week. Allow God to speak to you. Help you remember the big picture. Help you to remember what matters most. Help you get out of the tunnel. Help you to focus on the areas of your life that need focusing on. About every 7 days, I need, I don't know about you, but I need an infusion of truth. I need an infusion of inspiration. I need an infusion of encouragement. And so even if you didn't pay me, I'd be here. And I hope you will be too. Amen.